Welcome, everybody. My name is Cindy Ives, and I am currently professor of distance education at Athabasca University. My work with AMTEC began in the 1980s when I worked at the National Film Board of Canada, and then later as a distance education program developer at Laurentian University. Following that, I did a PhD in educational technology at Concordia University in Montreal. And I am currently the past president of the Canadian Network for Innovation in Education, and you'll hear more about that in this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Diane Janes. I am a coordinator with CELT, which is the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Thompson Rivers University. I got involved with AMTEC as a graduate student, and my supervisor was Mary Kennedy. So I'm thrilled to have Mary here today to have a chat with us. I started my work with AMTEC as a master's student. I finished my PhD at UBC in the early 2000s, and I'm looking really forward to this conversation.
My name is Chris Crowley. I'm a manager of the learning design team at the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology at the University of British Columbia. I've been involved with AMTEC since the early 90s. I served on the AMTEC Board of Directors for a few years, and also I was a Commonwealth Relations Trust bursar. And most recently, I've been chair of the the AMTEC Trust. So we want to welcome Mary, and before we do that, Mary, we just have a little bit of business to do in terms of consent forms, so let me call that up. Can you see that, Mary?
Yes, I do.
So hopefully you had a chance to read it before.
Yes.
All good?
All good.
All right. And now we will turn it over to Diane, who's going to do a little introduction to the Commonwealth History Project.
Okay. Yes, AMTEC History Project. You have Commonwealth on the mind today, Chris.
I know, yes.
Which is not a bad thing. No. So the AMTEC History Project was started by myself and Cindy and Chris as an opportunity to collect and preserve the history of educational technology in Canada. We are currently in the 50th anniversary year of the formation of AMTEC, the Association for Media and Technology in Education in Canada. It was formed in 1973, and what we wanted to do was digitize, protect, centralize, and make accessible the AMTEC collection, all of the various artifacts from the AMTEC process, and to make the history of AMTEC more accessible so that future generations of educational technologists and historians in this area would be able to access not only the materials that were created and or distributed during the time of AMTEC, but also to be accessible in terms of our knowledge keepers, the folks that keep our memories of how AMTEC was created. So this project started in 2022 in late winter, early spring. And the intention was to put together these interviews so that we had an opportunity to save those memories for these future educators. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mary Kennedy to the conversation. And Mary, would you like to introduce yourself? Spend a few moments telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Mary Kennedy, and I've got to remember to look up instead of looking down. And my background is rather lengthy since I'm pretty ancient now. And it started really as an academic when I was doing my master's degree from 1976 to 1978 at Memorial University. And then I went from there straight into my doctoral degree at Indiana University. And I was heavily involved really more with AECT for those first few years than with AMTEC. The interest in AMTEC and involvement in AMTEC developed jointly with my involvement with AECT. And when I came back to Canada, having finished my doctorate, then I got very involved with AMTEC. I got an academic position at Memorial University on our master's program that I had studied myself. And I also became heavily involved in AMTEC and spent 3 years, 88 to 91, I think, as vice president, president, past president. And then I also edited the journal for 3 years, and later on co-edited the journal for another 3 years. So I've been heavily involved in organizations surrounding educational technology all through my academic life.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I guess that one of the ways that we can sort of position your history is that you started out as a K-12 educator. That was your original focus.
Yes.
And would you say that was also sort of what got you into educational technology and then fundamentally into AMTEC and AECT?
It's interesting what got me into educational technology. I had been in the K-12 system for about 12 or 13 years, and the last 4 of which I was a principal of a K-12 school on a tiny island called St. Brendan's. And while there, I decided one summer to go and do a couple of summer courses because I was thinking around that time that I might, when I left St. Brendan's, go back and do my master's degree. I most likely would. So I went to Memorial, and somebody told me about a summer course taught by this visiting prof, Jeff Potter. And I went to Memorial that summer, and he had 3 courses all combined that were all-day events, and they were all in ed tech, which I had never studied until then. And Jeff had 2 advantages. One, he was extremely knowledgeable about ed tech, and 2, he was absolutely charismatic as a teacher. And so by the end of the summer, he had me hook, line, and sinker drawn into ed tech. And his full-time job at the time was at UVic teaching ed tech. And but he used to come to Memorial University in the summers and teach this summer course. So that really grabbed my interest. And until then, when I was thinking of going and doing my master's degree, I was thinking of doing my master's in English, which is what I had taught all through high school and stuff, years. And but his summer experience with me convinced me that ed tech was the way to go. So I applied and got accepted, and the rest is history.
So can I just ask a question, Mary? How in those days did you define ed tech, and how is that different from how you would define it these days?
Well, at that time and during those courses, the emphasis was on the application of the technologies, and in particular, media. In fact, everything was referred to, except AECT in the USA. AMTEC was Association for Media and Technology in Education in Canada. And so it was all about a wide and general application of various media. And there was not a lot of, there was one course on my whole master's program that dealt with the theory behind this and the ideas behind it. And then there was a lot more, of course, on my doctoral program. So I think the biggest difference for me was in the 70s, anybody who talked about ed tech were really talking about educational media, meaning the tools we use. Whereas as the field progressed and as we grew, and developed and so on, it moved more towards the underpinnings of those media and technologies and why and how we use them and so on.
So you would just to build on that question that Cindy had. So the original focus was very much on the practitioner side of the house rather than, say, the research or the theoretical side of the house in terms of the program that you were in specifically.
I think so, but not once we got to the master's level. Once I enrolled in the master's program, then we started to get more into what lies behind all this and systems theory and communication and so on and so forth. So there was a fair bit of theory in that master's program at Memorial. But until then, as a teacher out in the system and as a practitioner, and as with Jeff's 3 summer institute courses, they were all about using the various media in the best possible ways. So the emphasis was on application up to that point.
And so AMTEC, the AMTEC membership bridged those 2 areas, I think.
Yes.
And you've seen that happen. Was that a conscious effort? Was that just a way that people were gravitated towards AMTEC? So I guess this is a question about both the membership and interests of AMTEC, but also about the impact perhaps of AMTEC during your time with it.
Early on, the people who originally started AMTEC, there were 2 groups of people from what I can gather. I wasn't involved in the early 70s. I got involved in AMTEC in about rather heavily, but in the 1980s, really early 1980s. Through the 70s, as it happens, the head of our department at Memorial University, our department was called Educational Technology, I think, and the head of the department was Gar Fizzard, and Gar had done his doctorate at Indiana about a decade before I went off to do mine. And he came back and he headed up this new EdTech department within the Faculty of Education at Memorial. And Gar was one of the original founders, I think, of AMTEC. And this would have been in the early 70s. And so the move toward making it, there was that one group involved in AMTEC from early on, which were professors from various programs, including, I would assume, Concordia and a few others across the country. And there was a second group, and they were mostly not teachers, but school board members. And in fact, a few years later, when on my committee, when I was president and vice president and so on of AMTEC, a number of my board members were from school districts or school boards, and their focus was on making media and technology more accessible throughout the school system. So you had this joint group in early AMTEC, maybe we still do, of school system folks who were encouraging media and technology use, and the faculty members of various programs who were spreading the word as far as they could on the same issues.
It's interesting because you're talking about K to 12 through, and then, but also AMTEC involved universities and colleges, so they had this kind of depth to it. And then I see this breadth across Canada. So you sort of started your career on the East Coast in Newfoundland, Labrador, and the West Coast. So I'm wondering what did AMTEC do in terms of pulling the educational media, educational technology folks together across the country?
That's rather interesting. I would say when I think about my involvement with AMTEC, which came after a few years of involvement with AECT, I began to notice when I got back in Canada and was getting involved in my career in educational technology in Canada, I began to notice and become aware of the big differences between EdTech in the USA and EdTech in Canada. EdTech in the USA was gigantic by comparison, partly because they have 50 states, 48 of whom are on one another's doorsteps, and heavily populated, tons of universities. Oh, I just went blank.
Oh, we can see you and hear you.
I can't see a thing except learning theories. 6th edition. Can I do something?
No, we're recording you just fine. We can see your face and we can hear you.
Yeah, you're fine.
I can't see myself or you guys.
Yeah, it's possible that your screen just reduced or shifted. Did you happen to touch a computer, your keyboard or anything?
I might have touched my keyboard by accident. Anyway, I'll continue. Where was I?
You were talking about AMTEC and the
AMTEC versus AECT. Yeah, AECT, because the country is so different than Canada, and Canada is so spread out and so sparsely populated that it made the challenge of having a national educational technology association or any professional association, it made it a bit more challenging because there were such gaps, geographic gaps, and gaps in numbers of people involved in Canada as compared to the USA. When I was involved with AECT for the couple of years I was a student down there, it was, EdTech people were everywhere. They were coming out of the woodwork. And of course, being at Indiana University, which at the time had the best program in EdTech, it was like being at the core of educational technology in North America. So my involvement with AMTEC happened after I came back to Canada in the very early 80s, maybe by 82 or so. And one of the things I found was the half dozen or so universities that had educational technology graduate programs were close-knit and kept in touch and so on. And we as faculty members all got to know one another. But that was the main link, really, across the country.
So did you find that when you finished your initial connection to technology was through AECT, and then you also, when you moved back to Canada, it sort of switched to AMTEC. Did you find there was a transition period, or did you stay connected with AECT as you were going along? Because they're actually celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. So they were 50 years old when AMTEC started.
Yes, I kept my connection up with AECT. I think it was, I've got it here somewhere, yes, in 89 to 91. I was the AMTEC national affiliate for AECT, and I was the conference evaluator for AECT in the spring of 82. So I did keep up, and they in fact had given me 2 awards when I was a doctoral student. I got my first award, I'm sorry, when I was a master's student in 1978, and got to go to the AECT conference in Kansas City, all free, all paid for. And I was a conference intern. And in fact, I think I was the first Canadian intern ever at AECT. And then the next year, I won the AECT Okoboji Award for a summer institute at Lake Okoboji. So I had heavy involvement with them, and I felt like I belonged always to their organization, not to the exclusion of AMTEC or anything, but just to their organization.
So, when you were president of AMTEC, and what were some of the biggest challenges? What were some of your memories of the challenges at that time in terms of educational technology in Canada?
Well, this was the years of 88 through 91. I was VP, president, past president, and I didn't find any great challenges. I think maybe one of the biggest challenges was trying to impress upon the conference board members who were not academic the need for an academic approach to the association. I sort of remember a few of board members over that 3-year period of time, and after that, because I was still involved, even though I wasn't president or anything anymore. I seem to remember a few of the K-12 school district representatives wanting to always be more practical. Just, okay, what are we doing in the classroom? What should we do next? So on. And maybe even at times a little bit resentful of the fact that the academics on the board at the time, or heavily involved in the organization, were more concerned with the theories and academics behind the use of the technology. So that there was always this, it seemed to me, not a serious one, but a minor split or a minor bit of friction between the school system folks and the academic folks.
So, sorry, so go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to say, Mary, we did an interview with Bob Bernard, Dr. Bob Bernard from Concordia University, who I'm sure you know. And he talked about how that balance was addressed in the journal which he edited, in terms of having an academic sort of research side and a practitioner side in the journal. And that actually has continued through to today with the Canadian Journal of Learning Technology, which took over from or became from the Canadian Journal of Educational Communication, I think it was called in those days. And so that tension has continued through to today, but has been, I think he was suggesting, managed within the journal through the publication of both researcher and practitioner articles. Does that mirror your understanding of what went on?
I think so, yes. And that was, I think, the compromise that really allowed us to continue to work well together and so on, because that little bridge had been evident and was there. And at times it could be distracting. So it was, that was a good solution to that issue.
So I was just going to follow up in terms of that question about the time that you were president, vice president, and so on. So what were the things that you think made AMTEC important to educational technology in Canada? You've had the perspective of a student coming back from your studies into the Canadian sort of landscape. You've had leadership experience in this. Sort of what were those major important sort of ideas that AMTEC really was able to sort of balance or even offer leadership in?
Well, I think despite the major differences between Canada and the United States, and therefore AECT and AMTEC, I think really a lot of the people involved in AMTEC before or after me, or during my time and so on, especially in the academic setting, a lot of those people had studied in the USA, like Rick Schweer, Barry Brown, some other chap from Saskatoon. They all had gone to Indiana before I had. And there was Roger, someone from Florida State, and so on. And so you had all these people who had done their doctorates in educational technology, but because of the lack of doctorates in educational technology in Canada at the time, they had gone to the USA. By going to the USA and studying in doctoral programs, they automatically got to know and became involved in AECT to some extent. And I think it was the experience with looking at how AECT put out a regular sort of non-academic level journal, practical journal, an academic journal, had massive membership across the whole nation, had influence with school boards and so on to encourage more and more use and development of media and so on and so forth. I think all these people, me included, learned from that experience what we should be able to achieve through AMTEC if we built AMTEC right and if we did managed it in a good way. And so I think there was a history that we relied on from AECT and brought into our involvement with AMTEC.
So you also chaired one of the conferences in
Yes.
St. Newfoundland. One of the things we've discovered from our other conversations with the other academics that we've been working with, other memory keepers, is that AMTEC had a connection to community outside of Canada. So AECT we've talked about, or the United States.
Yes.
Do you recall as that conference went on, sort of who was there and what kinds of things were happening from the perspective of an AMTEC conference?
You mean AMTEC 90 in St. John's?
Yes.
No, it was well attended, but the attendance, like most AMTEC conferences, was from within Canada.
Okay.
There might have been one stray visitor who didn't get his paper accepted at AECT and tried for a nearby AMTEC one some year or something. But in generally, it was a Canadian group of educators. And my memory of AMTEC 90 in St. John's is not that there was anybody out of the ordinary there that I can think of.
Okay.
I always thought one of the great thing about AMTEC moving its conferences across Canada is what you got to see, what sort of activities and events and things were happening in that community. And that was always very informative because there was some cool stuff going on in these smaller communities.
Yes. And I think that's a key point. And AECT had been doing that, moving it all over the country, mainly in association with their various doctoral programs in different states and so on, who would then sponsor and take care of organizing the conference. And I think AMTEC's doing the same thing is an important factor. Like if we had decided, say, early on in the first 2 or 3 years of AMTEC, if it had been decided the conference would always be in central Canada to make travel easier from west to east and so on. And so it would be Ottawa or Toronto forevermore and so on. I don't think it would have had the same impetus and impact as distributing the conferences across the country. Wherever somebody had enough interest to work on the conference and make it happen, they could bid and get the next conference site. And I think that's an important thing, maybe with any professional organization.
So there was another component to AMTEC was we had K-12, we had post-secondary, but there was a lot of private institutions involved. And I know being on the awards team, there was the Sony Award, there's a Panasonic Award, and I know when conferences were held, they had the showcases and such for the private companies to show what services or technologies they could offer to the educational sector. Do you have any thoughts about that inclusion in AMTEC and the benefits to education?
Just general ones, like not from an AMTEC board perspective, because I don't remember enough of that, but just as a general principle, I think it's a very good idea. We are a technology-focused area of study. We are therefore dependent upon, to some extent, technology providers, producers, and so on. And the more we can have their support and give them some support, the better it probably is for all of us. So I'm certainly in agreement with that idea of having them become involved in our conferences and play a visible role in that, so that they can further their own interests, but also be supportive of ours.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, my own involvement with AMTEC when I was with the National Film Board was in the media festival and showcasing educational films, or what we thought might be excellent educational films in those days. And so purely from a networking, almost marketing perspective, a very different role myself from that which I engaged in later when I was an EdTech student. But what I remember is the networking, the connection with people from across the country, the learning from people across the country, and that was very impressive and clearly had an impact on me. Would you say that that's what AMTEC's goal really was to create that kind of enthusiasm in people and knowledge sharing?
Definitely. Like all my work with AMTEC, in whatever role, whether I was just a member or on the board or supporting some specific program or something or other, all of that involved collaborating with others. Like I collaborated a lot with Rich Schweer, for example, in Saskatoon, and Barry Brown and Bob Bernard at Concordia in Montreal. And so there was, and some others, of course. I can't remember who was at UBC at the time. I'm trying to think. I don't think they really had an EdTech program, but they might have. But they had somebody who was interested in it at least. And there was Jeff Potter at University of Victoria, but he wasn't, he was good, but he wasn't heavily involved in AMTEC. But all of these connectors that we maintained without Zoom or cell phones or anything else, or texting or anything, all of these connectors were crucially important to all of us, because despite the fact we had shared interests, we all really loved our discipline of EdTech, and we wanted to see it flourish and continue to grow and so on. And we knew that we had to rely on one another to do that. And so we really encouraged and kept up our communication with others, especially the ones of us in academia. We were always on the go with our other fellow academics all over the place across the country. And the idea was to build and to maintain a really strong educational technology presence in education in Canada.
So, Mary, you've named some people, all of whom are male. So I'm going to ask you what it felt like to be a woman in educational technology, a woman in a non-traditional occupation, because there aren't, in the documents that we've collected, there aren't a lot of names of women. And so you were maybe one of the first, one of the most active. I don't really know. What did it feel like?
Tell you what it felt like. It felt like I have my whole life, and that is that gender doesn't matter. I can do anything. And I don't know if it was my attitude that made other people treat me like that, but I was never, ever treated in either AECT or in AMTEC. I was never treated as anything except a person. And so I wasn't aware even of my own femininity because it didn't matter. It was, I find that interesting because I know there are some areas where being a female has a considerable impetus on what you do and how far you can go and what you can accomplish and so on. But I didn't find that ever to be the case in either AECT or AMTEC. And even though at times I might be the rare bird, sort of, I never felt that way at all. And I was never treated as anything other than a fellow professional rather than a male or a female.
That's really excellent to hear. Sorry, Diane, go ahead.
No, I was just going to follow up on that and sort of say, can you recall some of the other early women in EdTech that you would have worked with, specifically in Canada? Because as Cindy has noted, we've interviewed Maureen Barron, who clearly is one of those folks. And yet, when everyone remembers sort of AMTEC and even to some extent AECT, they often will have male mentors or male facilitators in terms of, and I'm just curious as to, do you have the names of other women that you would have worked with that perhaps we have not encountered yet and could add to our memory keeper list?
There was one in particular, but I don't know where she is or how long she's been gone, at least 20 or 30 years. I met her studying at Indiana. And when I got back in Canada and in Newfoundland in particular, I found out within a year or two, she was at Concordia University. And she was from somewhere in South America. And her first name is Mariella, and I can't remember her last name. I knew her fairly well, both at studying at Indiana and then afterwards. And she worked on the program with Bob Bernard, and she was very bright and very intelligent. And she was around for maybe half a dozen years or so, but I think then, I don't know where she went after that. It might have been back to South America. It might have been anywhere.
So I can answer some of that.
Oh, okay.
I worked with Mariella Tovar.
Thank you.
She worked at McGill when I worked at McGill in the Center for University Teaching and Learning, or what became Teaching and Learning Services. I understand she's just retired recently. This is the first time I've heard her name in this context, but I think maybe Chris and Diane, we might be able to search her out. She still lives in Montreal.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
and
so
I probably had it wrong. She might have been at McGill and not Concordia with Bob Bernard. I know she was in Montreal.
Yeah, no, she was a student of Bob's.
Oh, okay.
One of the first students in the educational technology PhD at Concordia.
Oh,
and then
I see.
Then she moved to McGill at some point. I'm not sure what she did in the intervening years, but we were colleagues, so that's a wonderful.
Oh, that's interesting.
Suggestion. Yeah,
she must have been. Maybe she was doing her master's when I knew her at Indiana, because if she did her doctorate with Bob, she wouldn't have been doing her doctorate there. So maybe she was on the master's program there and not the doctorate. But anyway, I haven't thought of her for years, but I do remember early on being back in Canada, and I remember her being also involved with some AMTEC stuff. So that's a possibility.
Well, thank you very much for the suggestion.
But in all, Diane, you're right. Like I look at, say, the people who were at, I don't remember all their names, but the people who were at Saskatoon with Barry Brown, which had a good-sized academic program, meaning 5 or 6 professors at the most. But they were all male. I was at Memorial. All the rest of them were male. And Eric Concordia, I don't know. I think most of them were male. And so it just was something that happened. I don't think it was planned or unplanned. And if I hadn't come across this Jeff Potter, who I'm still friends with, who turned my head completely on to EdTech, if I hadn't come across him, I wouldn't have studied EdTech. So it's
so that's a question. In Jeff's classes in that summer institute, how many women were in the course?
Say there would be 25 people altogether, or 30. There would be maybe 5 women.
Yeah.
So just a smaller segment. And I don't know if it was, I mean, at that time, it couldn't have been a techie issue because the technologies were not even technologies hardly. They were media, making slideshows, for God's sake, and audio tapes and the occasional videotape set. So it wasn't that they were so technologically that they nobody thought women would be capable of it or anything. It was just, it happened. That was all, I don't think there was any rationale behind it to any great extent.
So, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Diane. I wasn't sure if people had more questions or not.
By the way, I have you. By the way, I have you all back. I can see you now and see myself.
Excellent. I have one. I guess I have one sort of final question. And during the time that you led AMTEC, during the time that you worked in the journal area as an editor and co-editor, what did you think was AMTEC or Canada's greatest ed tech challenge at the time?
Probably more a question of the nature of our country and our university system than anything else. We are, and I'll bring this up again, I brought it up before, we are so spread out and we are so disconnected with other provinces and so on. Like I was working at Memorial. I had little or nothing to do with Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, or PEI because they didn't have ed tech programs. Mm-hmm. And the first ed tech program that I was closest to was Concordia, right. And McGill to a lesser extent. And then you skip across Ontario, and there was 1 or 2 spots of activity in Ontario. And then you finally get to the prairie provinces and you have 2 or 3 grad programs in EdTech there. And then you get to the BC on the West Coast and you have some EdTech courses, but no real program until when you were at UBC, Diane. They finally had gotten around to having some EdTech program stuff at, there was a master's program I taught on, I think.
Yeah, Masters of EdTech, yeah. That's still going strong.
Yeah, but that was later, that was a decade or nearly 2 decades from the beginning.
Oh yeah, later, definitely 2000 and later. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge and the impetus that kept a lot of us going was to make these connections and build on them, despite the lack of many viable programs. There were only a half dozen programs in EdTech in the whole country, and also the distances in between. And so I think that geography and those kinds of factors have been as much of a challenge as any of the idealistic type things.
Okay.
Any more questions? Because I have my mystery question, which I always have to finish off with. So,
Go for it, Chris.
all right. So, Mary, we're trying to figure out the story of the AMTEC blanket or quilt, if you can see it on your screen. Do you have any idea or any leads as to where it came from, maybe who created it?
I have racked my brain 100 times, and I cannot for the life of me think of it. I have one connection that is probably completely wrong. I had a good friend from my St. Brendan's school principal days, Leonce, who had 8 kids going to my school. And I became good friends with her that lasted after my time on St. Brendan's. And she used to come visit me in St. John's. And she used to do a fair bit of quilting. And so that seemed to me like it might be a connection, but I'm sure it isn't, because she had nothing to do with AMTEC. And if she made me a quilt as a favor, I think I would remember it. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't even look familiar to me now. And the idea that we have references to different conferences and things I've drawn a blank on it. I can't think of it at all. It's really weird.
It remains a mystery.
Yes, yeah, which is too bad.
Maybe somebody someday will be able to provide a clue.
Maybe so. Well, I couldn't ask Leonce, for Leonce sadly died 20 odd years ago now. But yeah, I have no idea where. I don't even remember ever having, the first look at it and have gotten it if I was involved in AMTEC. I don't remember that. I don't remember the first conference I attended where it was on display. It's just a blank, which is kind of scary.
Well, you're not the only one. It's mystery.
No, obviously.
So as we end our conversation with you today, is there anything that you wanted to say that we haven't asked you, or that would be from your memories of your AMTEC days?
Just one thing, probably. AMTEC, when I came back and got integrated into Canada academia and so on, AMTEC became a very, very important feature in my life. And it was for the couple of decades after that, all the time I was at Memorial teaching on the program, and even since out here, where I was doing part-time contract work and so on for 3 or 4 universities. So AMTEC has been a major influence on my thinking and on my life and on my growth in educational technology. And I think it deserves to be thought of in that way, and that it should, one of its aims in the future should be to to continue to grow and expand on that notion of what it can do to support and further the development of technology in education in Canada. So I think that's sort of the summary that I would make for my involvement and for what it gave me and what I hope I could have contributed to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Just wonderful to see you and to talk to you and to get a sense of what AMTEC was like in your life. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and I'm certainly here because of you. I mean, my career in educational technology would not have existed had you not gone to Jeff Potter's class in that summer.
I must tell that to Jeff the next time I'm talking to him.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, generations down, it's still happening.
Well, and it's interesting because I remember as a grad student, us having this conversation and you talking about the people you had studied with at Indiana, which you would consider first generation ed techers.
Yes.
And then you were second generation and you saw us as the third generation. of
Mhm.
educational technology. And then hopefully our students are the fourth and potentially even the fifth generation of ed tech. So
Yes.
seems to be going along relatively well, I think.
Yeah, I think so.